Commander, let's light the sky. Training sharper drone pilots, learning how to fly. Mission ready mindset, safety leading every plan. Skills that build confidence from takeoff through the scan. Tune in at Sky Commander, come join the crew today. Learning smart, fly with purpose, level up your way. We see more, no sooner, that's the edge we're here to spread. See above, go beyond, get ahead.
Okay, let's get started. Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision. It feels very much like engineering.
Right, yeah, like it's a math problem.
Exactly. Like if you break your arm, you go to the hospital, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black background, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is. That is the problem.
It's completely binary. I mean, it's either broken or it's not broken.
Right. It's clean. You know exactly what went wrong and exactly what needs to be fixed. But then you step into the world of human decision-making, especially like human decision-making under high stress in really dynamic environments, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Oh, yeah.
Totally useless.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just entirely murky. Yeah. Because when an incident happens, we desperately want to find a single broken part to blame, right? Like a snapped propeller or a faulty wire or a bad line of code.
Well, the easy answer. Yeah. But usually it isn't a mechanical failure at all. It's 1,000 tiny, almost invisible choices that just kind of cascade into a disaster.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Because when things go sideways in complex high-stakes systems, the root cause rarely looks like a snapped bone.
What does it look like then?
Well, it looks like a slow, quiet, methodical erosion of safety margins that absolutely nobody noticed until it was, far too late.
And that brings us to today's deep dive. Welcome to the show. Whether you're an aspiring commercial drone pilot trying to get your business off the ground, or a corporate leader managing complex tech operations, or honestly, just someone fascinated by the psychology of how humans make decisions when the heat is on, today is basically a masterclass in risk architecture.
It really is. We're unpacking the mindset required to operate at what industry professionals call a Sky Commander level.
Right, the Sky Commander Drone Safety and Incident Response Guide.
Exactly. And the goal here is to stop thinking like a mere drone owner, someone who just pushes buttons and trusts the microtips. Mm-hmm. We want to start thinking like a true systems operator.
Which is a fundamental shift in identity, right? Because the core philosophy of operating at that high level really comes down to this one distinction. Good pilots learn the event. Great operators learn the pattern.
Yes. That is the crucial difference.
Yeah.
The event is just this specific, isolated story. It's
right.
It's the narrative you tell at the bar, like, oh, the drone hit a tree, or the battery suddenly died, or the wind caught it.
Right, the surface level stuff.
Exactly. But the pattern is the underlying human behavior and the cognitive bias that actually allowed the aircraft to get near the tree in the first place.
Okay, let's frame this with an analogy that has literally nothing to do with aviation. Think about dating.
Oh, okay. I like where this is going.
Or maybe your career trajectory, right? We all know that one friend who keeps having these unique one-off bad dates, or maybe they keep quitting our jobs every 6 months because of a completely unprecedented toxic boss.
Right, and they genuinely believe that every bad date or every bad job is a completely unique, isolated narrative.
Yes. But eventually, as their friend, you look at them and realize, no, you keep falling for the exact same toxic pattern. It is just wrapped in a different costume each time.
The location changes, the face of the boss changes, the industry changes.
But the underlying flaw in their selection process is absolutely identical.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. Because drone crashes and really complex system failures in general operate on the exact same psychological principle.
Because they don't start with the tech.
No, they rarely start with a piece of broken technology.
Yeah.
I mean, a motor doesn't just inexplicably catch fire out of the blue.
Right.
An incident usually starts with a human being accepting a slightly smaller safety margin than usual.
Right.
It starts with a pilot looking at a really complex scenario and saying, it's probably fine.
It's probably fine. The most dangerous words in aviation.
Exactly. So today we're going to deconstruct the anatomy of a disaster.
Right.
We're tracking how incidents are built, not born.
Built, not born. I love that. That implies a real process.
It is a process. We're going to look at the invisible architecture of a failure, from the moment a pilot accepts a job to the exact moment the aircraft hits the ground.
So to understand how a mission goes sideways, we have to start long before the drone even leaves the ground. We have to look at the initial setup, the pre-flight phase, because this is where the very first hidden traps are actually set.
And this requires a complete reframing of what an incident actually is. Because in most incident reports, the highly visible event, the dramatic crash, the angry neighbor confronting the pilot, the drone flying away over a highway, that is actually a very late stage in the failure chain.
The crash is late.
Very late. The first bad decision happened hours or even, days earlier.
Okay, right. The visible event is just the symptom. The disease started way back on the ground.
Exactly.
For example, if an incident looks like a sudden battery emergency where the drone just falls out of the sky into a field, the first bad decision wasn't the pilot failing to hit the land button in time.
No, not at all.
The first bad decision was accepting a battery with an unknown discharge history while still standing at the tailgate of their truck.
Precisely. Or, let's say the incident looks like a massive public confrontation where a bystander is screaming at the pilot and the pilot loses control of the aircraft.
Right, which happens all the time.
It really does. But the first bad decision there wasn't failing to de-escalate the argument in the moment. The first bad decision was failing to plan how to handle public questions while the aircraft was airborne.
Like maybe they failed to bring a visual observer to run interference with the public?
Exactly. The visible event is late. The first bad decision is early. And this is precisely why pre-flight thinking so often fails.
And from what I understand, looking at the source material, pilots are generally very good at checking the easy boxes, right? Like they make sure the batteries are charged, they check that the propellers are secure, they look at the app to make sure the airspace says it's clear.
Yeah, they do the mechanical stuff.
Right. But they fail to imagine the unexpected. They plan a route, but they don't challenge the mission.
That is a critical distinction.
Yeah.
Planning a route is definitely not the same as challenging a mission.
How so?
Well, a planned mission says, we know exactly where we are flying today, point A, point B. It's very static.
Okay.
But a challenged mission takes a step back and asks, what if this route suddenly becomes completely unsafe halfway through? It looks for the abnormal branches.
To help operators systematically challenge their missions, industry professionals use a framework called the mission acronym. And I want to spend some serious time walking through this because it is incredibly thorough.
It really is. It reveals exactly how many variables a pilot actually has to manage before they even touch the controller.
Let's start with the first letter, M, which stands for mission objective.
Yes, M is mission objective. And this isn't just a vague idea like, we're going to fly the drone today.
We're going to go get some video.
Exactly. You have to define what you're actually trying to produce. What is the precise deliverable? Are you capturing thermal evidence of a roof leak? Are you building a high-resolution 3D mapping model of a construction site? Or are you just grabbing some generic marketing B-roll for a real estate listing?
But why does the specific deliverable matter so much to safety? I mean, flying is flying, right?
Because the objective defines what level of risk is actually justifiable. It sets the baseline for the entire operation.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, think about it. If you're just getting bonus B-roll footage of a nice sunset over a house, you do not push your battery to the absolute limit.
You wouldn't risk the drone for that.
Exactly. You don't fly in high winds for a sunset shot. The risk simply isn't worth the reward. But if you are conducting a critical search and rescue operation, and you're looking for a missing person in a forest as the sun goes down,
that completely changes things.
your risk profile completely changes. You might push that battery a little harder. You might accept a closer proximity to the tree canopy. Defining the objective defines the risk appetite.
That makes perfect sense. The goal dictates the acceptable margin. Okay, the next letter is I, which stands for inputs and information. This is the raw data gathering phase.
Correct. You cannot make a sound aviation decision without complete inputs.
Right.
And this goes way beyond just, looking out the window to see if it's raining.
Right.
Pilots need to check the airspace status. They need to read NOTAMs, which are notices to air missions.
Let's pause on NOTAMs for a second, because for anyone who isn't deep into aviation, that might just sound like boring bureaucratic paperwork. What actually happens if a pilot skips checking the NOTAMs?
Well, a NOTAM is real-time critical flight information that isn't known far enough in advance to be published on a standard aeronautical chart.
So it's like breaking news for the sky.
Exactly. Let's say the President of the United States decides to travel to a city. A temporary flight restriction, or a TFR, is issued via a NOTAM.
Okay.
It creates this massive invisible cylinder of restricted airspace. If a drone pilot relies on a week-old airspace map or just ignores the NOTAMs entirely and launches their drone within that TFR,
they're in big trouble.
They aren't just breaking a small rule. They are going to trigger a massive security response. Military or law enforcement helicopters could literally be scrambled.
Wow. Over a drone.
Absolutely. The pilot will face severe federal penalties, potential confiscation of equipment, and the loss of their license. So gathering inputs means understanding the invisible reality of the sky above you, right down to the minute.
It's the invisible reality. I like that phrasing. And that also applies to weather, right? Not just the macro weather report on the local news, but the microclimate data.
Exactly. You need to know the wind speed at altitude, not just on the ground where you're standing. You also have to consider space weather.
Space weather? Wait, really?
Yeah. The KT index. It measures geomagnetic disruption caused by solar flares.
I had no idea drones cared about solar flares.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
If the KP index is too high, it can severely disrupt the GPS signals your drone relies on to maintain its position. If you don't gather that input, you might launch into a sky where your automation is fundamentally compromised from the very start.
Okay, so we've defined the mission objective, and we've gathered our inputs. Then comes the first S-site threats. This is where we look at the physical reality of the location.
Yes. What can physically or electronically hurt the mission at this specific site? You have to map the physical hazards, obviously.
Yeah.
Power lines, the height of the tree canopy, busy roads, areas where the public has open access.
This is stuff you can crash into.
Right. But you also have to look for invisible site threats.
Like what?
Are there massive cellular broadcast towers nearby? Because those can generate intense RF or radio frequency interference that can actually sever the connection between your controller and the drone.
Oh, wow. So you just lose control completely.
Exactly. Or let's say you're taking off from a reinforced concrete parking deck. The massive amount of steel rebar beneath your feet can create magnetic interference that scrambles the drone's internal compass before you even take off.
So a site threat isn't just something you can hit. It's something that can reach out and scramble the brain of the aircraft.
Precisely.
Which leads directly into the second S system limits. Once we know the environment, we have to know exactly what the machine is capable of handling today.
Right. System limits require a really honest assessment of the hardware. What is the manufacturer's stated maximum wind resistance for this specific drone? How does the current temperature affect the density altitude and therefore the lift generated by the propellers?
It's not just a toy that works exactly the same everywhere.
No, not at all. And if you're carrying a heavy specialized payload, like a massive cinematic camera lens or a heavy LiDAR sensor, how does that added weight drastically reduce your flight time and change the center of gravity?
Right.
The drone does not perform the same way in freezing temperatures at high altitude with a heavy payload as it does on a sunny day at sea level.
Okay, so we have MISS, then comes again, incident branches. You mentioned this earlier, the failure of imagination. This is the mental rehearsal part.
Right. This is where you actively imagine failure. Military pilots use this constantly. You have to ask yourself, what abnormal events could realistically happen during this specific flight?
Like playing out the worst case scenarios.
Exactly. What happens if we lose control signal right as we're flying over that gap between the buildings? What happens if the client suddenly changes the scope of the project while the drone is in the air?
Oh, that's a good one.
Or what happens if a massive gust of wind rolls in over that hill? A mission plan without incident branches is essentially a highway with absolutely no exit ramps.
Wow, no exit ramps.
It might be a smooth ride for a while, but if there's a pileup ahead, you are completely trapped. You have to know where your exits are before you start driving.
And knowing your exits leads to operational controls.
Yes. If the incident branch is the imagined disaster, the operational control is the physical or procedural mechanism you put in place to prevent it or mitigate it.
So if your incident branch is, what if a pedestrian walks under the drone while we are inspecting this roof? Your operational control might be setting up physical barricades on the sidewalk.
Exactly. Or placing a visual observer down there with a radio to actively stop foot traffic. Other operational controls could be defining a strict mathematical standoff distance from a building. Say, never flying closer than 15 feet.
Right, setting a hard rule.
Or setting a hard battery trigger, demanding that the drone is back on the landing pad with no less than 25% battery remaining, no matter what is happening.
Which brings us to the final letter, N. No-go triggers. And honestly, this feels like the most psychological part of the entire setup.
It really is. N is perhaps the most crucial element, and unfortunately the one pilots failed to utilize the most.
What exactly is a no-go trigger?
A no-go trigger is a predefined line in the sand that absolutely stops the mission. If the wind hits 20 miles per hour, we stop. If we lose meaningful visual line of sight due to glare or fog, we stop.
It's black and white.
Yes. If the client asks for an unauthorized change to the flight path that we haven't mapped out, we stop.
But let me ask you this. Why do these have to be defined beforehand? Like if I'm a smart, experienced pilot, can't I just assess the wind while I'm flying and decide in the moment if it's too dangerous?
No, because human beings are terrible at negotiating with physics when under pressure.
Oh, I like how you put that.
That's true. When you're flying, you're dealing with cognitive load, you've got adrenaline, and you have this strong desire to complete the job. If you haven't spoken your no-go triggers aloud before launch, you will end up negotiating your own safety boundaries in your head while the pressure is at its absolute highest.
And you'll probably talk yourself into doing it.
You will almost always convince yourself to push a little further.
Which perfectly transitions us into the concept of pressure. Because even if you do the entire mission checklist perfectly, right down to the letter, you still have to execute it in the real world.
Yes, surrounded by human beings.
And human beings exert gravity on our decision-making. I want to look closely at the 5 distinct types of pressure that professionals identify as the forces that warp a pilot's judgment. Those are client, public, time, ego, and business pressure.
The big 5.
Let's start with client pressure, because in the commercial world, this seems to be the most pervasive and honestly insidious.
It is insidious because it rarely sounds dangerous.
Right, it's not some bad guy.
Exactly. Client pressure almost never sounds like a cartoon villain saying, hey, I demand you fly unsafely for me right now. It sounds friendly. It sounds collaborative.
Hey, man, could you just...
Right. Hey, since you have the drone up anyway, can we just get one more quick shot over the road, or we only need 5 more minutes to finish this segment?
They just don't know any better.
The client is not an aviation expert. They usually do not understand airspace regulations or the physics of battery voltage sag or wind shear. They're just a professional trying to get their own project finished.
But the pilot hears that simple, friendly request while carrying the psychological weight of providing good customer service. You're being paid. You want to deliver.
Exactly. So their judgment bends. They take a hard safety boundary, like I cannot fly over moving vehicles, and they reframe it in their mind as a customer service hurdle.
They rationalize it.
Yes, they think, well, the road isn't that busy, and I really want to keep the client happy.
And then on top of client pressure, you have public pressure. This is the unpredictable human element. You're focused on the drone, and suddenly a neighbor walks out of their house.
Oh, this is the worst.
They want to know if you're spying on them. They get angry. They might pull out their phone and start recording you, demanding answers.
And if you're a solo pilot operating without a crew, this situation can become a severe aviation hazard incredibly fast.
Because you're distracted.
You are suddenly forced to split your attention between flying a high-performance aircraft in a 3-dimensional environment and managing a hostile social conflict on the ground. The cognitive load spikes. The safest, most professional move is to immediately land the drone, stabilize the aviation risk, and then calmly talk to the person.
But pilots often don't do that because landing feels like losing the argument. It feels like retreating.
Exactly, which introduces ego pressure or self-image pressure.
Ego pressure is a quiet killer of safety margins, isn't it?
It really is. Every professional wants to be perceived as the calm, capable pro. You want to be the pilot who can handle the hard conditions, the difficult wind, the complex shots. You desperately do not want to be the person who has to look at a client or a bystander and say, I am not comfortable with this. I'm bringing the aircraft down.
Right. It hurts the ego.
So you perform confidence instead of practicing command. You make a flight decision to protect your own identity and pride instead of making a decision to protect the airspace.
That is a profound distinction. Performing confidence versus practicing command. And it only gets worse when you stack time pressure and business pressure on top of all that.
It all compound.
Like the light is fading, a storm front is moving in, your window to access the property is closing. That's time pressure. And you want repeat work. You want a good review. You need the paycheck. That's business pressure. When these 5 pressures stack up, the brain actually distorts reality, doesn't it?
It creates massive cognitive distortion. The pilot's internal monologue shifts entirely. They start thinking it's only a small change to the plan, or we're almost good anyway, or I'm a highly skilled pilot. My skill can overcome this environmental hazard.
But let me challenge this for a second, because I think a lot of people listening might have this exact question. Isn't a pilot's confidence and a can-do attitude fundamentally a good thing?
It depends on how it's applied.
Because if I hire a professional for a complex job, I want them to be confident. Doesn't asking what could go wrong at every single step just breed a culture of negativity? Like, doesn't it make an operator timid?
That is a very common pushback from outside the aviation industry, and it requires a really crucial distinction. There's a massive psychological and operational difference between negativity and preparedness.
Okay, break that down for us.
Negativity says, this is probably going to go badly, the gear's going to fail, the weather's awful, so why even bother trying? Negativity is a drain on resources. It saps confidence and breeds hesitation.
Right.
Preparedness, on the other hand, says, I understand the risks perfectly. If this specific component fails in this specific way, here is the exact pre-planned protocol we will execute to prevent it from becoming a crisis.
So preparedness actually creates confidence.
Exactly. It creates controlled readiness. In fact, one of the primary failure threads identified in post-incident investigations is literally defined as confidence outrunning conditions.
Confidence outrunning conditions.
When a pilot's internal confidence vastly exceeds the actual physical realities of the environment, the wind, the battery health, the signal strength, it becomes a primary architecture for disaster. True professional confidence does not come from pretending that failure is impossible. It comes from the quiet knowledge that you have a tested plan for when the failure inevitably occurs.
To anchor this in reality, let's look at the regulatory backbone that actually protects pilots from this pressure. Because aviation law is designed to give the pilot a massive shield against the client, the boss, or the angry bystander.
This is the ultimate trump card.
Right. In the United States, under FAA Part 107 regulations, the remote pilot in command, the RPIC, is the final authority over the operation, period. Okay. And in Canada, under Transport Canada's CAR 901.27, the law mandates strict site surveys, and CR 901.16 explicitly requires operations to cease immediately if aviation safety is endangered. The legal frameworks are blunt. A client cannot override the pilot.
Absolutely not.
A project manager on a construction site cannot override the pilot. A frustrated bystander cannot override the pilot.
That is the legal and operational bedrock of the industry. They can influence the social situation on the ground, they can yell, they can complain to your boss, but they cannot own the aviation decision.
You can't outsource the liability.
You cannot outsource your federal or national aviation responsibility to an impatient real estate agent. If the drone crashes, the FAA or Transport Canada does not care what the client wanted. They only care what the remote pilot in command allowed to happen.
Let's illustrate exactly how this pressure warps reality with a specific scenario from the source material. Let's talk about the friendly client trap.
Oh, this is a classic.
Picture this. You're a commercial pilot hired to film a massive commercial property. The client is right there on site with you. They're super nice, very collaborative, and they mention that the building officially goes on the market tomorrow morning, so they urgently need this exterior footage today.
High stakes, but friendly.
Right. It's critical for their launch. Now, the physical conditions are marginal. The wind is a bit gusty, and there's a thick line of tall trees along one side of the property. You're flying high, getting the standard wide shots, managing the wind just fine.
So far, so good.
And then the client looks at your monitor and says, hey, that looks amazing, but could you just do one quick, really low orbit right near the entrance sign by the trees? It'll only take a second.
This is the exact moment where the lack of pre-flight thinking collapses under pressure.
How so? The pilot didn't do anything wrong yet.
Well, the pilot did their basic job, right? They checked the weather, they ensured the batteries were full, but during their mission planning, they completely failed to imagine the incident branches. They did not ask themselves before launch, what specific shot request is most likely to tempt me into unsafe geometry near those trees?
Because they didn't anticipate the request, they didn't have a plan.
Because they didn't anticipate it, they did not have a refusal script mentally prepared.
So now, the pressure arrives unexpectedly. The pilot wants to please this incredibly friendly client who has a hard deadline tomorrow. They feel capable, their ego is involved, and the cognitive distortion begins.
Yes. They think, well, it's only really small change. I'll just drop down for a quick pass.
They completely ignore the physical reality that dropping lower puts them directly into the tree line and into the turbulent, unpredictable gust layer of wind that rolls over the tops of those trees.
They stop commanding the mission, and they start negotiating with it. They're trading their safety margin for customer approval.
Which is incredibly dangerous, so what should they do?
The professional decision in that moment is to pause the operation and use a pre-planned script. You don't just say a blunt no. You manage the client by saying, I understand we need the sign shot. However, Dropping to that altitude puts the aircraft into turbulent wind near the canopy, which exceeds our safety profile for today. I can offer you a wider, higher orbit that includes the sign, or we can use a stabilized ground camera to get a tight shot of the entrance.
You offer redirection, not just a wall.
Exactly. You separate the mission goal, which is getting a visual of the sign, from the flight decision, which is whether to fly a spinning blender into a gusty tree line. The failure wasn't missing the sign. The failure was not predicting that the sign would become the pressure point.
Precisely. The trap was set on the ground long before the client ever asked the question.
Yeah.
So let's say our hypothetical pilot navigates this perfectly. They handle the social pressure, they hold their ground on their stop triggers, and they execute the launch safely. But once the drone is actually in the air, a totally new psychological trap takes over.
Yes, the environment shifts.
It's not human pressure anymore. It's the illusion of technological safety. The pilot begins to trust the machine entirely too much. The margins start shrinking without them even noticing.
We're moving into the mid-flight phase now, where the core issues are trusting automation too heavily, underestimating the environment, and operating with a safety margin that is much thinner than it appears on the screen.
Because modern drones truly are technological marvels. They are packed with sensors, GPS modules, optical cameras, and complex flight algorithms. They make basic flight look incredibly easy. Anyone can pick up a controller, push the sticks, and the drone hovers perfectly still.
It's amazing tech. But this ease of use is a double-edged sword. It lies to us by making it look too easy.
It breeds complacency.
It creates a false sense of mastery. Features like GPS position hold, omnidirectional obstacle sensing, and automated return-to-home sequences, these are phenomenal tools, but they are strictly tools. They're not substitutes for human judgment. You cannot outsource your situational awareness to a microchip.
Let's dive deep into the physics of why that trust is so misplaced. Let's look at the drone will handle it trap, specifically focusing on GPS position hold. When a pilot lets go of the sticks, the drone uses satellites to lock itself in three-dimensional space. It stops drifting, it fights the wind automatically, it looks perfectly rigidly controlled. Why is it dangerous to trust that?
Because GPS relies on a relatively fragile data link. It requires a clear, unobstructed line of sight to multiple satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
If you're flying in an open field, it works beautifully. But let's say you're flying in an urban canyon, a downtown commercial district, surrounded by tall, reflective glass skyscrapers.
The environment completely changes the physics of the signal.
Exactly. Those satellite signals beam down, but instead of hitting the drone directly, they bounce off the glass walls of the skyscrapers. They reflect back and forth. The drone's receiver picks up multiple delayed versions of the exact same signal.
That sounds like a mess.
In physics, this is called signal multipath.
So the drone is receiving conflicting, echo-like signals about where it actually is in space.
Yes. The drone's internal computer gets confused. It thinks it's in one place. Then a fraction of a second later, the multipath data tells it it's 10 feet to the left. The GPS hold degrades or fails entirely.
And what happens to the drone?
The drone will suddenly switch out of GPS mode and drop into what is called attitude mode, or ATTI mode. It will no longer hold its position. It will immediately begin to drift with whatever the wind is doing.
Just coasting.
Yes. If you trusted the automation too much, if you're staring at your camera settings assuming the drone have it, your perfectly stable aircraft is suddenly drifting sideways at 15 miles an hour toward a wall of glass, and you might not realize it until the impact is imminent.
That is terrifying because the machine doesn't warn you it's about to get confused until it already is.
Exactly.
And then there's the ultimate safety crutch, return to home, or RTH.
Oh boy, the panic button.
People treat the RTH button like a magical rescue rope. If you lose visual sight of the drone, or the video feed cuts out, or you just get disoriented, you press the button and the drone autonomously flies back and lands at your feet. But relying on RTH can actually become a pre-programmed collision plan. How does a safety feature cause a crash?
Because RTH is a dumb algorithm. It is only exactly as smart as the pilot who programmed its parameters before the flight.
Okay, explain that.
When you hit RTH, the drone executes a basic logical sequence. It stops, it climbs to a preset altitude, it turns toward the home point, and it flies in a straight line.
That sounds fine, theoretically.
Theoretically.
Huh.
But if a pilot carelessly left, the RTH altitude set to 100 feet, but there is a 150-foot crane or a tall pine tree directly between the drone and the home point,
Oh no!
the drone will faithfully, automatically fly in a perfectly straight line directly into that obstacle. It will execute its programming right into a disaster.
And even if you clear the obstacles, the environment can still turn RTH into a death sentence through wind dynamics, right?
Consider the environmental threat. Let's say a pilot flies out a mile to inspect a power line. They fly out with a strong 20-mile-per-hour tailwind pushing them along. It feels fast and effortless.
They're making great time.
Right. Then the video feed cuts out. Panic sets in and they hit RTH. The drone stops, climbs to its RTH altitude, and turns around.
And now it has to fight the exact same wind it was just riding.
Worse, because wind speeds generally increase the higher you go.
Ah.
So the drone climbs up where the headwind is now maybe 25 miles per hour. It pitches aggressively forward to fight the wind and make progress toward home. The motors are straining at maximum capacity. This heavy physical load draws a massive amount of amperage from the battery.
So it's burning through power.
Rapidly. The battery drains at double or triple the normal rate. RTH didn't save the pilot. It put the aircraft into a high-altitude aerodynamic brawl that it might not have the battery capacity to win. The drone could simply exhaust its power and descend into a forest or a highway long before it reaches the home point.
Which brings us perfectly into the illusions of battery life. Because margin is often vastly thinner than it looks on the screen. A lot of new pilots look at the battery percentage on their tablet, say 45%, and they treat it like the fuel gauge in a Honda Civic.
It is not a fuel gauge.
They think it's a linear, highly predictable representation of exactly how much time they have left.
Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of lithium polymer battery chemistry. A battery percentage is not a fuel tank volume. It is just one algorithmic clue based on current voltage. It does not fully represent the internal health of the cells, and it certainly doesn't account for temperature.
Walk us through the chemistry of that. What happens when a pilot flies with a cold battery?
Lithium polymer batteries rely on a chemical reaction to release energy. When the battery is cold, let's say it was sitting in the trunk of a car on a winter morning, so the core of the battery is cold-soaked, that chemical reaction slows down dramatically.
Okay, makes sense.
The internal resistance of the battery increases.
So it's harder for the power to get out?
Exactly. When you turn the drone on, the screen might still read 80% because it is measuring the resting voltage. The pilot thinks they have plenty of time. They launch and they push the throttle hard to climb.
And the motors are asking for juice.
The motors demand a massive spike in current to fight gravity. But because the cold battery has high internal resistance, it cannot deliver that current fast enough. The physical voltage of the battery plummets instantaneously. This is called voltage sag.
The power just falls out from underneath it.
Yes. The aircraft's computer detects this critical drop in voltage, assumes the battery is entirely dead, and might trigger an uncommanded immediate auto landing right where it is, whether it's over a lake, a busy intersection, or a forest.
Wow.
The aircraft does not care that your screen said 80% 2 minutes ago. It only cares about the physical voltage available to keep the motors spinning right now.
I love how professional operators frame this concept. They treat margin as a literal resource.
Yes, margin is currency.
We all understand that battery life is a resource. We understand that memory card space is a resource.
Yeah.
But the safety margin itself is a currency that you spend. You spend your margin when you make the choice to fly farther away, degrading your visual line of sight. You spend margin when you choose to fly closer to people or property. You spend it when you fly in turbulent winds or when you decide to push the flight time to the absolute edge. The fundamental question a Sky Commander asks is this specific shot request actually worth the margin it will cost me to execute it?
And very often, if you're being honest, the answer is no. If you're flying with a razor-thin margin and you're relying entirely on the drone's automation to compensate for the wind and keep you safe, you are meticulously setting the stage for a failure.
It reminds me of driving. Relying on drone automation without deeply understanding the environmental physics is exactly like driving a car with a faulty, unpredictable fuel gauge while using cruise control on a dark road that is covered in black ice.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
You're sitting in the driver's seat, you feel perfectly safe, the car is maintaining its speed automatically, the heater is on, everything feels completely smooth and under control.
Right up until
the exact microsecond that physics takes over, the tires lose traction and you slide off a cliff. You didn't suddenly become unsafe at the moment you slipped. You were fundamentally unsafe the entire time. The technology was just masking the danger.
If we step back and connect this to the bigger picture, this exact phenomenon is known as automation complacency, and it applies to virtually all modern technology.
Like what else?
Think about the deployment of AI in the workplace, or advanced self-driving features in consumer vehicles, or automated diagnostic software in hospitals. Automation is inherently designed to reduce our immediate manual physical workload. The machine does the tedious part.
Which sounds great.
It does. But the trade-off is that it demands a significantly higher level of supervisory vigilance.
Oh, so the mental workload actually goes up because you have to watch the machine.
Precisely. When the machine is executing the easy work, the human being's job is not to zone out, check their phone, or relax. The human's job is to constantly skeptically monitor the environment for the exact moment the machine gets confused or overwhelmed.
Because it will get confused eventually.
It's inevitable. In aviation, when the drone's automation inevitably degrades, the pilot must instantly, seamlessly transition from being a passive monitor to being an active aviator.
So let's look at the timeline. We are mid-flight. The safety margin has thinned out because the pilot flew a little too far out, the wind picked up unexpectedly, and they're relying heavily on GPS to hold the drone steady. The drone hasn't crashed yet. The screen looks okay. This is the critical phase where the universe usually gives the pilot a whisper of a warning.
A whisper, yeah.
And how the pilot responds to that quiet whisper determines the entire outcome. This is the transition from a normal flight to a crisis.
We are talking about the emergence of weak signals and the profound psychological trap of planned continuation bias.
I am absolutely fascinated by this concept of the weak signal. When we review incident reports, we see that most disasters whisper before they shout.
Always.
The system tries to tell the operator it's failing. What does a weak signal actually look or feel like in the field?
A weak signal is early, subtle evidence of drift from the intended plan or the normal operating parameters.
Yeah.
It's not a blaring red klaxon or a mechanical failure.
It's subtle.
Very. It's a slight, unexpected lateral drift of the aircraft when it should be perfectly still. It could be the battery percentage dropping just a few points faster than your mathematical calculation predicted.
Okay.
Maybe a brief magnetic compass warning flashes in yellow on the corner of the screen for 2 seconds and then vanishes. Or maybe your visual line of sight, your ability to physically see the orientation of the drone, is getting just a little bit fuzzy because the drone is flying into the glare of the setting sun. It's a tap on the shoulder.
And the dangerous human response to that tap on the shoulder is rationalization.
Every time.
The pilot says, oh, it always drifts a little near this building, or the warning cleared off the screen so the computer fixed it. We are good. We explain away the data that conflicts with our desire to finish the mission.
We rationalize it instantly because acknowledging it would require us to change our behavior. Transport Canada trains pilots using a very specific framework called the Threat and Error Management Model, or TEM.
How does that work?
The entire premise of the TEM model is that threats and human errors are completely inevitable in daily operations. You cannot eliminate them. The goal of a professional crew is to identify and manage those threats before they result in what the industry calls an undesired aircraft state.
An undesired aircraft state being when the drone is drifting toward a tree or the battery is critically low and you're over water?
Yes. The sequence is rigid. A weak signal is a threat. If a pilot dismisses that threat, they commit an error in judgment, and that error leads directly and predictably to the undesired state. The weak signal is your only chance to break the chain.
So why do we dismiss them so consistently? This is where the psychology gets really heavy. It comes down to planned continuation bias.
It's a powerful force.
It is the overwhelming psychological pull of just a little more. Let's look at a scenario. You are flying an automated mapping grid over a 100-acre construction site. The drone is flying back and forth, taking photos like a lawnmower.
Very standard operation.
You are 85% done with the flight path. But the sun is starting to set, the light is fading, and you notice the wind has picked up, causing the battery to drop a bit faster than you want. The weak signals are there, but the human brain screams, "We are almost done!"
Planned continuation bias is an incredibly powerful cognitive virus. It is deeply rooted in the sunk cost fallacy. Humans despise wasting effort.
Of course, it's frustrating.
If you stop the mapping mission at 85%, you have to pack up all your gear, drive home, process incomplete data, wake up early tomorrow, drive all the way back to the site, set up again, and refly the entire grid.
Nobody wants to do that.
Nobody. The brain calculates that massive inconvenience, and it fundamentally reframes the immediate situation. Instead of asking the crucial aviation question, is this flight still within our safety margins? The brain asks a completely different question. Can I squeeze this out before the battery completely dies?
The objective shifts from safety to completion.
Exactly. You undergo a psychological transition. You stop being a risk manager. You start being a gambler. You are betting your aircraft and your liability against the physics of the battery.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting, and I am going to play devil's advocate for a moment.
Go for it.
Let's say the drone is still flying normally. I am 90% done with the mapping job. The battery is low, but not dead. Doesn't it make logical, economic sense to spend that last little bit of battery reserve to finish the job rather than wasting an entire day tomorrow? I mean, in the commercial world, efficiency is a massive virtue. Time is money.
True.
Isn't pushing the envelope a little bit just part of being a professional who delivers?
Efficiency is absolutely a virtue in business, but efficiency is never a safety control. Your question highlights one of the most dangerous biases in complex operations: outcome bias.
Outcome bias. Explain that mechanism.
Outcome bias is the human tendency to judge the quality of a decision based solely on the final result, rather than evaluating the decision-making process at the time it was made.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Let's follow your scenario. You decide to push the battery, you fly it down to 2%, the drone struggles against the wind, but it finishes the map, and you manage to land safely. Your brain floods with dopamine, you feel relief.
A huge sigh of relief.
And you look at the drone and say, see, it was the right call. I got the data, I saved a whole day of work, and everything is fine.
But the reality is entirely different.
The reality is that that is a complete lie. A good outcome does not prove you made a good decision. It simply proves you got lucky.
Wow. You just got lucky.
You operated completely outside your planned safety margin, you exhausted your reserves, and the environment just happened to forgive you this one time. A bird didn't attack the drone, the wind didn't gust 5 miles per hour harder, the GPS didn't glitch.
But next time it might.
Exactly. If you reward that terrible decision-making process because of a lucky outcome, you engage in what sociologists call the normalization of deviance. You teach your brain that flying to 2% battery is actually safe. You will do it again on the next job. And eventually, mathematically, the environment will collect its payment.
That is a harsh way to look at it, but it proves that getting lucky shouldn't be confused with being skilled. The normalization of deviance is how entire organizations eventually collapse.
Yes.
Let's look at one more scenario that perfectly illustrates how weak signals and continuation bias team up to destroy an operator. It's called the hidden tailwind pattern.
This is a classic textbook trap that catches both new and experienced pilots.
How does it work?
You launch the aircraft, and you command it to fly out to a work area about half a mile away. The drone flies out incredibly fast. It feels smooth, it feels efficient, the motors sound great. That smooth, fast flight is actually your first weak signal.
Wait, that is so counterintuitive. The drone flying fast and performing smoothly is a warning signal.
Yes, because if it is flying unusually fast in one direction with very little throttle input, it means you have a significant tailwind pushing the aircraft. You are surfing on the wind. But the pilot is likely suffering from overconfidence. They look at the screen, they see they covered a half mile in record time, and they think, wow, I have so much battery left. This is incredibly efficient. I can fly even further out. I can grab a few more cinematic shots of that distant tower.
The planned continuation bias kicks in just a little more.
Exactly. They completely ignore the weak signal that the outbound leg was suspiciously easy. They spend 15 minutes filming the tower. The battery hits 30%. They decide it is time to come home. They turn the drone around to fly back.
And they hit a solid wall of moving air.
The outbound tailwind is now a brutal inbound headwind. The drone pitches forward aggressively. It is fighting with absolutely everything it has just to make 1 foot of forward progress.
Because it's fighting the wind, it was just riding.
Exactly.
Oh.
And because the motors are straining against the aerodynamic drag, the amperage draw spikes massively. The battery percentage doesn't just tick down, it plummets.
It just drains.
It drops from 30% to 15% in a matter of seconds. The safety margin the pilot arrogantly thought they had vanishes instantly. They are now in a critical, undesired aircraft state, entirely because they misinterpreted the weak signal of the tailwind and let the bias push them to stay out longer.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in that exact moment. The weak signals were ignored, the pilot pushed for just one more shot, they turn into the headwind, the battery is plummeting, and suddenly, to make matters worse, the automation drops out.
The perfect storm.
The GPS gets confused by some multipath interference from a nearby building, the tablet screen starts throwing red error messages, the video feed stutters and freezes. The crisis is officially here. It is happening right now.
This brings us to the moment of absolute truth.
What happens?
When the automation degrades, Manual competence suddenly matters. All the expensive technology, all the 4K cameras, all the pre-flight planning, they all collapse into one single, terrifying question. Can the human being holding the controller actually recover this physical aircraft manually?
Because when the app stops helping and the screen goes crazy, human biology takes over. The industry refers to this as the startle effect. What is physically and neurologically happening to the human brain in that exact microsecond?
The startle effect is a massive physiological and psychological jolt. When the brain detects a sudden, unexpected threat like the drone suddenly tilting and drifting rapidly toward a hazard, the amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex.
A total hijack.
You get an instantaneous dump of adrenaline and cortisol, your heart rate spikes, and crucially, your vision and attention physically narrow. It is a phenomenon called attentional tunneling.
The brain hyper-focuses on the perceived source of the threat.
Yes. And in a drone crisis, the perceived source of the data is the controller screen.
Not the drone itself.
Right. So what usually happens is the pilot stares intensely at the tablet. They fixate completely on the flashing battery warning or the glitching pixelated video feed. Meanwhile, they lose absolutely all spatial awareness of the actual physical aircraft in the sky, the wind pushing it, and the trees or buildings surrounding it.
They just freeze.
They freeze, or worse, the adrenaline makes them over-control. They panic, their fine motor skills evaporate, and they yank the control sticks violently to the extremes.
And this brings us to a massive, pervasive myth that needs to be busted wide open. The myth of manual competence. Because when people think about flying a drone manually, they usually picture a cinematic hotshot. They picture an FPV drone pilot swooping through tiny gaps in a ruined building doing flips and rolls.
Yeah, that is stunt flying. It is highly skilled, absolutely, but it is not what we mean by manual competence in an emergency.
What is it then?
True manual competence in a crisis is the ability to make the aircraft profoundly boring again.
Boring. I love that.
When the drone starts doing something dynamic and surprising, your entire job is to reduce the drama. You do not try to save the cinematic shot. You do not try to land it perfectly on a tiny pad. You slow the physics down, you stabilize the aircraft, you create spatial distance from immediate hazards, and you regain your mental orientation.
Industry experts break this recovery process down into what they call the 7 layers of the manual competence stack. If you fail at any one of these layers, the entire recovery attempt collapses.
It's a delicate stack.
Let's walk through these because this is the anatomy of a save. Layer 1 is orientation.
Orientation is the fundamental baseline. You have to know exactly which way the nose of the aircraft is pointing and how your physical stick inputs on the controller will move the drone relative to your body on the ground.
Which changes based on where it's facing.
Yes. If the drone is facing away from you, pushing the right stick to the right moves the drone to your right. But if the drone is spun around and is facing towards you, the controls feel completely reversed. Pushing right makes the drone move to your left.
Oh, that's confusing.
If you get startled by a gust of wind and you push the stick right, thinking it will move the drone away from a tree, but the drone is facing you.
You literally fly it at maximum speed directly into the branches.
Exactly. In an emergency, without GPS to hold it still, you have to decipher the drone's orientation instantly, visually, without looking at the screen.
Layer 2 is smooth stick control. This is where the adrenaline really hurts you.
When startled, a pilot's panic brain commands large, sharp, maximal inputs. They jam the stick all the way forward. The drone pitches violently, accelerates massively, overshoots the intended mark, and begins to wobble and pendulum.
That makes it worse.
Much worse. Smooth stick control means fighting the adrenaline. It means applying small, deliberate inputs first. You nudge the stick, you pause to observe how the physical aircraft responds, and then you collect deliberately.
That reminds me of an incredible analogy I read regarding this exact physical response, the coffee cup analogy.
Oh, I use this one all the time.
It's so good. Imagine you are walking across a crowded room and you are carrying a ceramic mug filled absolutely to the brim with scalding hot coffee. You're walking carefully. Suddenly, someone jumps out from behind a door and startles you. What physically happens? Your heart jumps, your muscles contract, you jerk your arm, and you spill boiling coffee all over yourself.
A startle reflex caused the disaster.
Right. So how do you save a full cup of coffee when you get startled? You can't just not be startled. You have to actively override the reflex. You slow your body down, you stabilize your core, you tense your arm to keep it level, and you move deliberately. Manual drone recovery is exactly the same neurological process. Smooth, deliberate, measured inputs, not heroic, panicky yank.
Exactly. Layer 3 built on that. Mode awareness.
Knowing what the drone is thinking.
You need to know instantaneously what internal flight mode the drone's computer just dropped into. Did it lose GPS because of multipath and switch to attitude mode?
And if it did?
Because if it did, the brakes are gone. It will not stop when you let go of the sticks. It will coast and drift with the wind like a boat on a river. You have to understand what the automation is doing, or more importantly, what it is not doing in that exact second.
Layer 4 is wind correction. We touched on this with the headwind trap. If you are in attitude mode, the wind is entirely your problem now. You have to physically hold the stick against the wind just to hover in place.
Yep, you're the GPS now.
Layer 5 is attention control.
Attention control is the physical act of breaking that startle fixation we talked about. You have to tear your eyes away from the terrifying error messages on the tablet screen and cycle your visual attention.
Look at the sky.
Look at the actual aircraft in the sky. Look at the obstacles around it. Assess the wind direction by looking at the trees. Scan the ground for an emergency landing zone. Look back at the aircraft. You have to keep the physical data flowing into your brain.
Layer 6 is calmness. And this isn't just fluffy self-help advice. There is an actual physical sequence pilots use.
It is a neurological reset protocol designed to stop panic inputs. The sequence is: breathe deeply to lower the heart rate, lever the aircraft first, locate it visually, clear from immediate hazards by climbing or moving away, recover the stability, then land. It is a structured process to force the brain out of the amygdala hijack.
And finally, layer 7 is recovery thinking. This is where the pilot's entire operational priority must shift.
Yes. The moment an operation goes sideways, the pilot must mentally switch from production mode to recovery mode.
Introduction to recovery.
In production mode, your brain is asking, how do I frame this shot? How do I get this data for the client? The moment the weak signal becomes a crisis, you enter recovery mode. The deliverable, the photos, the 3D map, the inspection data, drops to the absolute bottom of the priority list.
You just give up on the job.
You must accept that the mission has failed. The top absolute priorities become protecting people on the ground from a falling object, protecting the surrounding airspace, and regaining basic aerodynamic control of the aircraft. A weak, dangerous pilot keeps trying to finish the mission while the drone is unstable. A professional Sky Commander pilot instantly abandons the mission to save the aircraft and protect the public.
Let's visualize this entire stack coming together with a realistic scenario. You are flying an urban corridor. The drone is 50 feet up, navigating between two massive, reflective glass office buildings.
A classic urban canyon.
The client wants a tracking shot of a car on the street below. Suddenly, the GPS drops out entirely due to multipath interference. The screen flashes red, the drone instantly drops into attitude mode, and the wind funneling between the buildings starts pushing the aircraft sideways, drifting directly toward a wall of glass windows.
What does manual competence look like in these 10 seconds?
First, attention control and recovery thinking. Stop looking at the tablet. Stop trying to keep the car perfectly framed in the camera. The mission is over.
Second, mode awareness. Recognize that you are in ATTI mode and the drone will not brake on its own. Third, orientation. Look up, find the drone, establish which way the nose is pointing. Critically, do not apply sudden yaw inputs that spin the drone around, which would only confuse your orientation further.
Smooth, measured movement.
Exactly. Fourth, smooth stick control and wind correction. Gently push the cyclic stick into the wind to counter the drift and physically move the aircraft away from the glass wall.
Fighting the drift.
And fifth, calmness. Breathe, hold the aircraft steady against the wind, calmly fly it manually out of the corridor to a pre-planned safe zone and bring it down.
Okay, so our hypothetical pilot manages to do exactly that. They override their startle reflex, they remember to breathe, they use smooth inputs to fight the drift, and they manage to navigate the drone down to a safe landing in an empty parking lot.
A successful recovery.
The motors spool down, their hands are shaking, their heart is absolutely pounding out of their chest. The friend client walks over, slaps him on the back and says, "Whoa, that wind came out of nowhere. Incredible flying, man. Nice save."
The worst thing they could say.
Everyone exhales. The crisis is averted. But, as we are about to learn, the mission is still not over. Let's move into the final phase of our deep dive, the ultimate defense, which is honest debriefing.
Because a scare, a near miss, have absolutely zero inherent value by itself. Surviving a crisis is not automatically the same thing as gaining wisdom.
Right, you didn't learn anything yet.
If you almost hit a glass building, laugh nervously, land the drone, blame the unpredictable wind, pack up your gear and go home to have a beer, you learn nothing.
Yeah.
You merely survived.
And this brings up a massive cultural trap within aviation and many other high-risk industries: the extreme danger of celebrating the hero story. Why does celebrating a nice save actually poison an organization's safety culture?
Because it fundamentally rewards dramatic recovery over quiet, boring prevention. If a team surrounds a pilot and high-fives them for heroically dodging a tree branch at the last second, they are celebrating the adrenaline.
They're rewarding the wrong thing.
Yes. They are completely ignoring the fact that the pilot's poor mission planning, their failure to check the wind at altitude, and their capitulation to client pressure is what put the drone 3 feet from a tree branch in the first place. You are rewarding the cure while completely ignoring the disease.
That's a great way to phrase it.
A good save should not trigger a celebration. It should trigger a massive, uncomfortable review of why the initial setup was so incredibly flawed that a heroic save was even required.
To structure that uncomfortable review, professionals use 3 levels of debriefing. Let's unpack these because it shows how deep you have to dig to find the actual root cause. Level 1 is the event.
Right. Level 1 simply asks, what physically happened? The drone lost GPS, drifted, and almost hit a glass building.
That's the baseline.
It's factual, it's accurate, but it's shallow. It doesn't teach you anything about human behavior.
Level 2 goes deeper. It looks for the cause.
The cause, the event. The drone was flying too deep into the urban canyon, multipath interference killed the GPS, and a gust of wind pushed it while it was in ATI mode. This is better. We understand the physics now, but it's still not enough. At level 2, you are still blaming external factors, the buildings, the radio waves, and the wind.
Which brings us to level 3, the pattern or the system.
This is where the professionals live. Level 3 asks, what human decision pattern allowed this physical scenario to occur?
The underlying flaw.
Exactly. The answer looks like this. The pilot wanted to please the client by getting a complex tracking shot. They trusted the GPS automation too much in an environment known for multipath interference. They did not mentally rehearse an ATI mode recovery before launch, and they did not define a strict standoff distance from the glass before taking off.
Oh, that's entirely different.
That answer is absolute gold. That answer doesn't blame the wind. It highlights the human failure of margin management. And that allows you to fix the system.
To operationalize this, operators use the FACE model to structure their post-flight debriefs. Let's break this down. F stands for facts, the objective data of what actually happened.
Yes. Airspeed, altitude, battery voltage, stick inputs. A is for assumptions. This is critical.
What does that mean in practice?
What did the pilot believe to be true before the flight that was ultimately proven false? I assumed the GPS would hold. I assumed the wind was calm at altitude.
C is for conditions. What changed in the physical or social environment? The client added a surprise shot request. The temperature dropped, cold soaking the battery. E is for error pattern. Which of our predictable human factor traps did we fall into?
Did we succumb to planned continuation bias? Did our confidence outrun the conditions? Did we dismiss a weak signal?
And finally, S is for system change. This is the ultimate output of the debrief. What are we physically or procedurally updating in our checklists, our training manuals, or our client contracts to ensure this specific pattern never repeats?
Because if there's no system change, the debrief was just a conversation.
And we should anchor this heavily in regulation again, because debriefing isn't just a corporate best practice. In many jurisdictions, it is literally the law.
People often forget that.
Transport Canada's CR 901.49 requires flight operations to completely cease after specific incidents or severe near misses. You must ground your fleet and stop flying until a full analysis of the cause and the implementation of corrective actions are complete and documented. The law forces the debrief into existence. You cannot legally just shrug off a flyaway or a severe loss of control and launch again the next day.
Exactly. The regulations demand accountability.
But let's talk about human nature. In a real-world scenario, how do we actually conduct a debrief without it turning into a toxic defensive blame game? Or a shame session where nobody wants to admit they messed up? If I am the pilot and I know deep down that my ego caused the near miss, my natural instinct is going to fight tooth and nail to hide that fact. I'm going to blame the drone.
This is the hardest part of safety culture. And it is why we must rigidly differentiate between blame and accountability.
How do you separate them?
Blame is toxic. Blame asks backward-looking questions laced with judgment. Who messed up? Whose fault is this? Who broke the expensive gear? Blame makes humans defensive.
And when they get defensive?
When humans are defensive, they hide their mistakes, they lie about the battery levels, they delete the flight logs, the data is lost.
Accountability is different.
Accountability asks forward-looking structural questions. What happened? Why did that action genuinely make sense to you at the time you made it? What pressures were you feeling? And how do we change the system to protect you next time?
It's about learning, not punishing.
Accountability assumes the pilot is a professional trying to do a good job, but who fell into a highly predictable human cognitive trap.
There is a brilliant exercise for this called the Wingman Challenge.
Oh, I love the Wingman Challenge.
It's fascinating. It asks you to take an incident story, a near miss, and rewrite the narrative entirely without being allowed to blame the drone hardware, the wind, the client, or bad luck. If you strip away all the external excuses, what human factor pattern remains?
It forces brutal honesty. Let's say a pilot's initial story is the wind came out of nowhere and pushed me into the tree.
Oh.
If they do the Wingman Challenge, they have to completely remove the wind as the primary cause.
So what's left?
So they reread it. I accepted a flight path with a critically thin clearance margin near a physical hazard. I failed to check the microclimate forecast, and I did not define a return trigger for increasing gusts. When you remove the external blame, you find the internal failure.
And a phenomenal question to ask at the end of these debriefs is, what did we almost normalize today? I absolutely love that phrasing. What creeping, dangerous standard did we almost accept as okay?
That's a great temperature check for the team.
Did we almost normalize launching with a 60% battery just because we were in a rush? Did we almost normalize flying while answering an angry bystander's questions instead of landing immediately? Did we almost normalize letting a friendly client override our safety boundary?
Catching those almost normalized moments is exactly how you fix a safety culture before an airframe ever hits the ground. If you catch the creeping standard early in the debrief, you reset the margin. And if you reset the margin, you don't ever have to test your manual competence in a crisis.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have dissected the anatomy of risk. Let's bring this all together. Over the course of this deep dive, we have traced the entire life cycle of an incident.
The whole timeline.
We've seen how disasters are meticulously built, link by invisible link. They start on the ground, with comfort and incomplete mission planning. They are fed by unchecked assumptions and the heavy gravity of social and client pressures.
And then we get into the air.
We take off and we blindly trust the automation to manage our shrinking margins. We actively ignore the weak signals, the little drifts, the suspiciously fast outbound flights, the rapid battery drops, because our brains desperately want to finish the job.
Plan continuation bias.
And finally, when the physics overwhelm the microchips, the machine gives up. We are left staring at our own adrenaline-fueled startle reflex, hoping our smooth manual recovery skills are sharp enough to prevent a catastrophe. The difference between a drone owner and a Sky Commander-level operator is simply this: recognizing the costume that the failure pattern is wearing today and having the discipline to interrupt the chain early.
I want to leave our listeners with the ultimate rule of high-risk operations. Never waste a near miss.
Never waste it.
A near miss is incredibly expensive, highly potent emotional data. It is the universe giving you a free, unobstructed look at the fatal flaws in your system without making you pay the terrible price of a crashed aircraft, an injured bystander, or a massive lawsuit.
It's a gift.
If you shrug it off, if you blame bad luck, if you blame the client's demands, you completely waste that data. But if you analyze it honestly, if you admit your cognitive biases and you turn that scare into a stronger stop trigger or a newly refined checklist, you honor it. That is what professional operators do.
And here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on as you go about your day. Building a personal warning system, learning to recognize these cognitive traps, defining your margins, this isn't just about aviation.
No, it's everywhere.
It applies to every complex system in human life. Think about your career choices, your business investments, your relationships. What weak signals are you currently dismissing in your own life because acknowledging them would be highly inconvenient?
That's a deep question.
Where is your personal safety margin much thinner than it looks from the outside? And most importantly, what pre-planned no-go triggers do you need to write for yourself right now, in the column of today, before the massive pressure of the moment hits you tomorrow? Because whether you are flying a complex piece of robotics through an urban canyon or navigating a massive life decision, the patterns of human failure are exactly the same. The only question is, are you going to learn the pattern, or are you just going to keep repeating the event?
A fantastic question to reflect on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for the patterns beneath the stories, keep challenging your own assumptions, and remember, until next time, don't let a unique, one-off bad date turn into a lifelong toxic pattern. We'll see you on the next deep dive. That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.